The cold wind cut across the open fields of northern France, carrying with it the smell of damp earth, burnt fuel, and something heavier, something final. It was early morning, September 1944, near the outskirts of Arracourt. The fog had not yet lifted, and visibility was barely 50 meters. Engines rumbled somewhere in the mist, low and steady, like distant thunder rolling closer.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
You can almost feel that chill pressing against your skin, the kind that makes your breath visible and your hands stiff even inside gloves. Inside a German Panther tank, Oberleutnant Karl Brenner leaned forward, eyes fixed through the periscope. He had heard the rumors. American tanks were everywhere now. Cheap, mass-produced machines. Easy kills. At least, that's what they had been told. But this morning felt different. This morning, something didn't sit right, because the silence in front of them wasn't empty. It was waiting. Just days earlier, German crews had laughed openly at the idea of facing American Shermans. The Sherman tank, officially the M4, was known among German crews as a Ronson. They said it lit up the first time, every time. Its armor was thinner, its gun was weaker. On paper, it didn't stand a chance against a Panther or a Tiger. German tank doctrine relied on superiority, better optics, stronger armor, more powerful guns, and for much of the war, that had been true. One Panther could knock out several Shermans before they even got close. That belief was so strong that it turned into arrogance, and arrogance in war often hides danger in plain sight. But war has a way of punishing arrogance. On the American side, crews knew their tanks were not the strongest. They knew the risks every time they climbed inside that steel shell. The M4 Sherman had its flaws. Its high profile made it easier to spot. Early versions had issues with ammunition storage that could lead to fires. But what they had was something different: numbers, coordination, speed, and a command structure that was learning fast. By late 1944, American armored units had changed how they fought. They stopped thinking in terms of one-on-one duels. Instead, they moved as groups, as packs, working together like a system instead of individuals. And that system was about to be tested. At 7:30 hours, near the village of Lise, elements of the German 11th Panzer Division began advancing through the fog. Their objective was simple: break through the American lines, push west, regain momentum. They believed the Americans were disorganized, retreating after earlier engagements. What they didn't know was that the U.S. 4th Armored Division, under Major General John S. Wood, had already repositioned its forces in the area. Combat Command A, led by Colonel Bruce C. Clark, had carefully spread its units across key terrain, ready to respond quickly to any German movement. Inside one of those Shermans, Staff Sergeant Joe Martinez sat in the gunner's seat. His hands rested lightly on the controls, but his grip was tight. He couldn't see much outside, just shadows moving in the fog. His commander, Lieutenant James Carter, stood half-exposed in the turret hatch, scanning with binoculars that showed almost nothing. The radio crackled with fragments of information. German armor had been spotted, multiple units, unknown strength. Somewhere ahead, the tension was thick, not loud, not chaotic, just quiet and heavy. Then it happened. A shape appeared through the mist, low, wide, and unmistakable. A Panther tank, its long 75-millimeter gun pointed forward like a spear. It hadn't seen them yet. Or maybe it had. It was hard to tell in that fog. Carter didn't hesitate. He dropped into the turret and gave the order. The Sherman moved slightly, adjusting position. Martinez aligned the gun. The range was close, too close for comfort. "Fire!" The shot cracked through the morning air. The Sherman rocked slightly from the recoil. The shell struck the Panther's side, just behind the turret. Not a perfect hit, but enough to damage it. The German tank stopped. Smoke began to rise. But there wasn't just one. More shapes began to emerge. Panthers, several of them, moving in formation. Confident, controlled. For a moment it looked like the old story would repeat itself. A few Shermans against superior German armor. But then something changed. From the left, another Sherman appeared, then another from the right, then 3 more from behind a low ridge, engines revving, tracks grinding through mud. Within seconds, the quiet field transformed into a moving web of steel. The Germans weren't facing 1 or 2 tanks anymore. They were facing many, and they weren't spread out randomly. They were closing in. American tank units had learned to fight in coordinated groups. They used terrain, movement, and communication to surround stronger enemy tanks. They didn't try to outgun the Panthers. They outmaneuvered them. As Brenner inside his Panther tried to identify targets, he realized something was wrong. The Shermans weren't charging straight ahead. They were spreading out, flanking, moving into positions where his armor was weakest. He barked orders to his crew: turn, adjust, fire. But every time the turret rotated, another Sherman appeared somewhere else. One of the Panthers fired first, its shell tearing through a Sherman on the far right. The American tank erupted in flames, its crew barely escaping. But the loss didn't break the formation. If anything, it tightened it. More Shermans moved in, using the fog as cover. They closed the distance, reducing the advantage of the Panther's long-range gun. At close range, the fight became something else entirely. Fast, chaotic, unpredictable. Within minutes, nearly 20 Shermans had converged on the German position. Brenner felt it before he fully understood it. They were surrounded. The myth of the superior tank began to crack in that moment. Not because the Panther was weak. It wasn't, but because it was alone in a system that required coordination, and the Americans had built something stronger than individual power. Martinez fired again. This time, the shot hit the rear of a Panther, the weakest part of its armor. The impact was immediate. Flames burst from the engine compartment. Another Sherman fired from the opposite side, then another. The Germans tried to respond, but they were overwhelmed by angles. Every direction held a threat. Inside the American formation, communication was constant. Short commands, clear movements. Each tank knew its role. Some advanced, some covered, some repositioned. They weren't just fighting, they were hunting. And behind that coordination was something less visible, but just as important. American radios worked well. Every Sherman had one. Crews could talk, adjust, and react in real time. German tanks often relied on fewer radios or limited communication between units. That small difference, invisible from the outside, shaped everything in moments like this. By 8:15, the field near Arracourt had turned into a graveyard of burning armor. German Panthers, once feared and respected, now sat disabled, their crews either captured or retreating. The fog that had hidden the battlefield began to lift slightly, revealing the scale of what had just happened. The Shermans were still there, moving, alive. The Panthers were not. This wasn't a single event. It was part of a larger series of battles known as the Battle of Arracourt, fought between September 18th and September 29th, 1944. During this time, American forces, particularly Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division, faced repeated German armored attacks, and again, the pattern repeated. German tanks advanced with confidence, expecting to dominate. And again, they were met by coordinated groups of Shermans that used speed, numbers, and positioning to break that dominance. The numbers tell part of the story. Over the course of the battle, American forces destroyed or disabled over 200 German tanks and armored vehicles. Their own losses were significantly lower, but numbers alone don't explain what happened. Because this wasn't just about equipment, it was about adaptation. The Sherman tank was never designed to be the best in a duel. It was designed to be reliable, easy to produce, and easy to repair. It could be transported quickly, maintained in the field, and replaced when lost. Factories in the United States were producing thousands of them, month after month. While German industry struggled under constant pressure, American production kept flowing. That meant more tanks, more crews, more opportunities to learn and improve. German tanks, on the other hand, were complex, powerful, but difficult to maintain. Panthers often broke down before even reaching the battlefield. Tigers required constant care. When one was lost, it wasn't easily replaced. When one broke down, it often stayed that way. So, while German crews trained to fight as individuals with superior machines, American crews trained to fight as teams with dependable ones. And in a battlefield like Arracourt, where visibility was limited and movement was key, that difference mattered. Back inside another Sherman, Corporal David Harris wiped sweat from his face despite the cold. His tank had just taken a hit, glancing, but enough to shake them. The radio buzzed with updates. Another German unit was approaching from the east. There was no time to rest. The Shermans repositioned again, forming a loose arc. Not a rigid line, something flexible, ready to shift. The next wave came in stronger. More Panthers, even a few Tigers reported. The Tigers were different, heavier, slower, but their guns were devastating. A single hit could destroy a Sherman instantly. Harris knew this. Everyone did. But they also knew something else. Tigers were not invincible. As the German heavy tanks moved forward, they struggled in the muddy terrain. The ground around Arracourt had been softened by recent rain. Fields turned into thick mud that slowed heavy vehicles. The weight of a Tiger, over 50 tons, became a disadvantage. Their speed dropped. Their ability to react slowed. The Shermans took advantage. They didn't face the Tigers head-on. They moved around them, distracted them, forced them to turn their turrets again and again, and while the Tigers tried to track one target, another Sherman would move into position. Side shots, rear shots, close range. One Tiger managed to knock out 2 Shermans in quick succession. Flames shot into the sky, thick black smoke rising. But it couldn't turn fast enough. 3 Shermans closed in from different angles. 3 shots fired. The Tiger stopped moving. Inside, silence. The battlefield was loud again. Engines, gunfire, metal hitting metal. But beneath that noise, something had shifted. The fear that once surrounded German tanks was fading, not completely gone, but changing. Because now American crews had seen something with their own eyes. They had seen Panthers burn. They had seen Tigers stop. And once you see that, the myth loses its power. There was also another factor, one that rarely gets attention in quick summaries. American forces had strong support from reconnaissance units and artillery. Light tanks and scout vehicles moved ahead, reporting positions. Artillery units stood ready behind the lines. When German formations were detected, American commanders could call in fire to disrupt them even before the tanks engaged. This layered approach made every German advance more difficult. By the end of September, the German offensive in the Arracourt sector had failed. Despite their advanced tanks, they could not break through the American lines. The Shermans had held. More than that, they had dominated. Not because they were stronger, but because they were smarter in how they fought. Years later, historians would look back at Arracourt as a turning point in armored warfare. A moment where tactics, coordination, and adaptability proved more important than raw power. And for the crews who were there, it wasn't about theory, it was about survival. Joe Martinez would later describe the experience in simple terms. He didn't talk about strategy or doctrine. He talked about movement, about trust in the other tanks around him, about knowing that he wasn't alone out there. That was the real difference. The Sherman was never meant to win alone, but together it changed the battlefield. And somewhere, in those early days of September, German crews who once laughed at the cheap Sherman began to understand something they hadn't expected. It wasn't the tank they should have feared. It was how it was used, because when 20 of them moved as one, even a tiger could be surrounded. And in the fog of Arracourt, that lesson was written in fire, steel, and silence that followed after the guns finally stopped.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.